How to Introduce Your Husband to Your Super Serious Crime Fighting Group by A. Hamilton. A Justice League, Superman, Batman, and DCU fanfic, rated for teen and up audiences, with additional tags for established relationship, identity porn, identity reveal, secret relationship, relationship reveal, fluff, hijinks and shenanigans, Bruce Wayne is a menace, but Clark loves him anyway. What canon is this? I think the answer to that is yes. Angst, crack, bickering, married couple, married Clark Kent / Bruce Wayne, art, digital art, in chapters 6 and 7. Summary. Can we meet him someday? Clark hesitated. It wasn't as though his professional life and his personal life overlapped very often, Bruce and the kids being some of the very few exceptions. The only way Clark would be able to introduce Bruce to the League, aside from him getting kidnapped and them having to save him, would probably be bringing him up to the Watchtower, out of the suit, as a civilian. And Clark didn't see Batman being comfortable with that anytime soon. Probably not, but we'll see. Or, Clark has finally revealed his identity to the League, who immediately found out he was married to Bruce Wayne. If Clark had his way, Brucie and the League would stay far, far away from each other. Too bad his husband didn't get that memo. Chapter 1. Clark walked down the steps to the Batcave, his stomach churning with anxiety. This was it. Today was the day he would reveal his civilian identity to the Justice League. He knew, logically, that he didn't have too much to worry about. He worked with these people for years now, and trusted them with his life. And yet, his palms were all clammy, and his heart was beating out of his chest, and his nervous energy was, apparently, obvious enough that Bruce could sense it without taking his eyes off the screen in front of him. "You don't have to do this," he sighed. I know, but I want to. Everyone else has already shared theirs. It's only fair I do the same. I need to show them I trust them. They know that. They had this conversation practically every single day for the past 2 weeks, ever since Clark grilled Bruce on the pros and cons of revealing his identity. Do they? I mean, sure, they know I trust them to have my back in a fight, but surely that should extend to trusting them with more than just work, no? You've seen how much closer they got once they know someone's real name. It's like a mental barrier, or something, that you can't fully trust someone unless you know their name. I've been trying to predict what everyone's reaction will be. Clark leaned on his desk, frowning off into the distance. Diana knows. Jean knows. Oliver and Dinah know who I am, but we've never actually talked much outside of the suit. Arthur probably won't care, or at least, he won't get excited over it. So it's the others I'm worried about, really. It could range from, "Oh, cool, I have no idea who you are," to, "Tell me everything about yourself right now." You don't have to tell them anything you don't want to. Bruce grunted, clearly trying to get the conversation over with so he could go back to work. I know, I'm just anxious, I guess. Bruce softened slightly at that, reaching out a hand to squeeze his wrist, and said, "You can back out at any point. I'll make sure no one makes you do anything you're not comfortable with." Clark smiled down at him. Wow, he loved this man. "Thanks, B," he murmured, pushing himself back from his desk. He leaned over to kiss his husband's cheek, then turned to walk out of the Batcave, his heart significantly lighter than it had been when he came in. Clark was not super proud to admit that he barely listened at all during the League meeting that evening. He could feel Batman's annoyed glances towards him, and he knew that, on any other day, he'd get called out and asked to recap what was just discussed. He was partially grateful for this leniency, but also, if there were any actual consequences for his zoning out, he might be more inclined to pay attention. As it was, Clark sat there for 2 hours, bouncing his leg, and thinking about anything and everything but the meeting. Finally, Batman cleared his throat and put his bat tablet down on the table. That concludes all announcements and action items. As always, if there is anything that comes up during the week that requires immediate attention, you will be alerted. Is there anything else that anyone would like to bring to our attention? Clark looked around the room, at all the bored faces, clearly eager to get away from this room. Well, he didn't really want to be the cause of any annoyance if anyone had stuff to do, and really wanted to leave, and What if Clark was stopping someone from going to see their parents, or going on a date, and maybe he should postpone this for now, and try again on a day when they were ending early, so that he didn't take up everyone's time. Bruce cleared his throat once more. He wouldn't actually pressure him into making this decision, but they both knew that Clark would beat himself up about chickening out if he didn't just speak up right now, and... Batman straightened up and opened his mouth to dismiss everyone, and Clark panicked. He blurted out. All eyes turned to him. Oh God. He took a deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly. Batman sat down, waiting. They were all waiting. For him. Why did he do this? I have an announcement. Or, well, I guess it's not so much an announcement as much as I don't know something, but Clark stopped stuttering. He drew in another breath. Okay, I know you all know the importance of keeping secret identities safe. He saw a couple of people perk up at the mention of secret identities, probably looking forward to figuring out who Superman was underneath all the spandex. Bruce's words, not his. So, I trust you know that this information cannot leave this Watchtower. There were nods all around. Clark took yet another breath in, and reached up to tousle his hair, and slip on his glasses that he'd gotten from a hidden pocket in his suit. I'm Clark Kent. I'm an investigative journalist for the Daily Planet. As expected, practically no one knew who he was. But Ollie froze, and stared at him with wide eyes, and Dinah's gaze kept darting between the two of them, as if to confirm that she wasn't going crazy. And Ollie was seeing this too. Clark shot a shaky grin to both of them, and Ollie's jaw dropped. After about 15 seconds of silence, Barry yelled, "You're disguise's glasses?" Bruce let out a huff of amusement, quiet enough that Clark was the only one who heard it, and he just barely resisted glaring at him. Wait, I know you. Why do I know you? Hal asked, squinting his eyes so much that Clark wasn't sure if he could actually see through the slivers. I don't know, Clark responded. He really didn't. He didn't think Clark Kent had done anything particularly noteworthy recently, that anyone outside of the news industry would know him. I mean, I won a Pulitzer a few months ago. Maybe that's it? No, I don't care about that, Hal said, shaking his head as though the very thought disgusted him. Uh-oh. Yeah, that's what Clark figured. Something gossipy. Something gossipy? It was in the news a few years ago. Clark paused, running through the past few years in his head. There was that one time a couple years ago where he sparked a very small Twitter debate by sharing a controversial article, but that hadn't ended up on the news, as far as he knew. Then there was that other time he rallied all his reporter friends and all of Bruce's socialite friends to save all the struggling animal shelters in the Gotham metropolis area. That one had ended up on the news, and Clark was proud of it. And then there was... I don't know. I got married to Bruce Wayne? Hal's jaw dropped to the floor to join Ollie's. Clark had just enough time to think, oh shit, before the entire table exploded. It didn't really, but the effect that one throwaway sentence had was so loud and immense that it might as well have. It seemed as though everyone had 10 different questions they had unknowingly, or in Hal's case, probably very knowingly, stored up, for the unlikely event that they met Bruce Wayne's husband. Clark was sure that a regular human would have been overwhelmed by the amount of noise that suddenly burst through the room. So for him, it was 1,000 times worse. He squeezed his eyes shut in an effort to eliminate one of his senses to make it more bearable. It didn't work. He might have actually made it worse, because now there was nothing else to focus on, other than the noise. And it was so loud. He balled his hands into fists to distract himself, but his damn fingernails wouldn't hurt his damn skin, and it was too much. A sudden loud bang sounded somewhere in the room, and all the noises ceased. He took a moment to slow his breathing and pried his eyes open, to the sight of Batman leaning over the table, fist resting on the table where he had probably slammed it down a few seconds ago. He growled, "Superman will answer your questions only if he wants to, but I expect a certain level of decorum in this meeting room, which many of you have failed to uphold today. Superman has shared this information with us out of respect, and we will show him that same respect going forward. Am I understood?" There were various noises of assent from around the table, and a few apologies directed at both of them. Bruce settled back down and nodded at Clark, giving him control over the conversation once more. He blew out a long breath. "Okay, yeah. I'll take 5 questions and no more. We all have places to be, and I don't want to drag this out." He watched as they all quieted down to deliberate over the best questions to ask. After a few seconds, Ray raised his hand. Clark nodded at him. "How long have you two been married?" "Oh, come on!" Wally exclaimed. "You can just look that up online. We have to ask things that actually matter. Like, how big is his No?" Clark shouted. Wally cackled, and Clark debated tackling him to the ground. "We've been married for 6 years. It'll be 7 in November." He heard the groan of disappointment from the people who considered this a waste of a question. He rolled his eyes. "Is he the same as the gossip mags show him?" Hal asked. "Absolutely not. No. He's so much more." Clark felt his face break into a soft grin. He loved talking about Bruce. He didn't get to gush about him enough, because the people he spent his time with were either the kids and Lois, who all groaned when Clark got gross and sentimental, or his parents and Alfred, who listened indulgently, but barely reacted after 10 years of the same conversation, or the League, who he hadn't been able to tell until now. Diana had a small smile on her face as she raised her hand and asked, "What is your favorite thing about him?" She'd known Batman's identity for years, but they'd never met outside of the suit, so Clark guessed this was coming from a desire to know who Bruce could be when he wasn't dark and brooding. Well, he was always dark and brooding, but she wasn't wrong in assuming that the real Bruce was a lot more interesting than the masks he put on. Clark considered this question for a bit, letting his eyes flick over to Bruce for a fraction of a second before dropping to the table. "There are way too many things to pick out a favorite. I love his smile, the way his mind works, and the way he treats the kids, and his sense of humor, and how he trusts me with every part of himself. He's the best person I know, and the best person I ever will know, and I'm so damn lucky I get to spend the rest of our lives with him. I could keep going, but I don't think you're all here to see me get sappy." He glanced around the room, taking in the looks on people's faces. Some of them were smiling, probably finding it sweet to watch Superman get mushy, and some of them were fake gagging, clearly finding it absolutely disgusting to watch Superman get mushy. He looked over at Bruce, face impassive as always, though Clark could hear his heartbeat thumping just a tad harder than usual. Arthur, who Clark was pretty sure hadn't asked anything the entire time, broke the thoughtful silence that had settled over the room. "How many children do you have?" "No!" Wally interjected again. "You can Google that! Don't answer that, Soups. What's the weirdest thing about Bruce Wayne?" Weirdest? Now, that one had actually caught him off guard, and he wasn't sure how to respond. Yeah, like, not annoying or bad, but just weird. Clark thought back over the past decade or so of being with Bruce, and tried to come up with something that he still wasn't quite able to normalize, and still thought of as strange. Oh, he puts his ice cream in the microwave. He could feel the weight of Bruce's death glare, and resolutely decided to ignore it. Not to melt it a bit, or so it's easier to scoop. No. He'll scoop it out into a bowl, and then put the bowl in the microwave for 30 seconds. It comes out completely melted, and barely even cold anymore. He has never once eaten ice cream normally in the entire time that I've known him. Clark heard the laughs from all around him, but his focus was solely on the way Batman's gloved hand had come up to pinch the bridge of his nose. "He sounds like a monster!" Barry gasped out between bouts of laughter. Clark grinned. "Yeah, he's the best. Right, last question. Make it count." Hal leaned forward. "Is he as good as they say?" he asked, shit-eating grin on his face. Clark felt his face heat up, and shot that line of questioning down immediately. "Not answering that. Nope. Nuh-uh." "Aw, come on," Hal whined. "Then you gotta answer another one, 'cause that one doesn't count." "Fine. Can we meet him someday?" Clark hesitated. It wasn't as though his professional life and his personal life overlapped very often. Bruce and the kids being some of the very few exceptions. Oliver and Dinah were already well acquainted with Brucie, but they were in his social circle, so crossing paths was common. The only way Clark would be able to introduce Bruce to the League, aside from him getting kidnapped and them having to save him, would probably be to bring him up to the Watchtower, out of the suit, as a civilian, and Clark couldn't see Batman being comfortable with that anytime soon. Probably not, but we'll see. Batman's attention had been focused squarely on Clark during this whole interaction, but now he caught it shifting to Hal, and then around the table at the other members. Most people would have brushed it off as inconsequential, an acknowledgement that the conversation was over and everyone should be dismissed. But he knew better. Bruce was up to something. Clark wasn't sure he wanted to know what it was. The next few weeks passed easily, and Clark had almost forgotten the entire Bruce Wayne meeting the Justice League thing. No one brought up Clark's civilian identity again, which he was glad for. He hadn't wanted that knowledge to change how the League saw him, both as a leader and as a fighter. Hadn't wanted them to see his identity as a flaw or a weakness in Superman's persona. In hindsight, that was a stupid thing to worry over. After all, most of the others had civilian identities, and no one questioned their importance to the team as a result of it. Today was miserably quiet, and Clark had noticed his attention drifting a while ago, but hadn't made any effort to bring his focus back. There wasn't anything to focus on anyway. They were all gathered around a few tables in the mess hall. Some of them had food, some were playing a card game, and all of them could feel the boredom weighing them down. Bruce had said that he was going to be there, but his meeting was running late. Just as Clark was about to stand up to go find some food, or go to the training room, or walk around, or do something that wasn't just sitting down being bored, he heard the sound of the Zeta tube going off. He perked up. Batman would come in and see them all sat around doing nothing, and he'd get all pissy and start ordering people to run drills, or go on patrol, and finally they'd have some motivation to get up. Clark was too busy imagining Batman's little tantrum that he didn't realize something was wrong until the footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. The wrong footsteps. That wasn't Batman. Batman's footsteps were steady and measured and heavy. Bruce's footsteps were also steady and measured, but didn't have the suit lending him extra weight. These footsteps were inconsistent and light, and Clark buried his head in his hands and groaned. He could feel everyone's attention turned to him, but they didn't have the chance to ask him what was wrong before Brucie goddamn Wayne sauntered through the doorway. Clark raised his head to glare at him, and was met by the infuriating smirk that his husband wore when he knew he'd fucked with Clark successfully, and he couldn't retaliate. The entire room was silent for a few seconds. Then Brucie said, "Hi!" and all hell broke loose. Which wasn't all bad, actually. Once Clark realized that all hell breaking loose was basically just Hal and Barry saying, "Oh my god, it's Bruce Wayne, holy shit, what the hell?" over and over in an otherwise silent room. Brucie ambled his way over to them, pushing Clark upright from where he was still sat hunched over in embarrassment, and sprawled himself sideways on his lap. Great. Clark closed his eyes, breathing deeply and reminding himself that he did, in fact, love this man, and that he would probably not be easily forgiven if he stood up right now and let Brucie fall flat on his ass. He should have guessed. Bruce was all too aware of his distaste towards his public persona, so of course this would be his plan to fuck with Clark. He opened his eyes again, just as Bruce was finishing up with introductions that were entirely unnecessary. Diana was hiding a smile behind her hand. Oliver was clearly trying not to seem like he knew Bruce, which, for some reason, consisted of staring wide-eyed at anything and everything that was not Bruce. Clark hadn't known the ceiling was so interesting. And Hal still looked like he couldn't believe his eyes. Fair enough, honestly. Brucie Wayne in the Watchtower was not something he thought he'd ever see, and he was pretty sure it was something he never wanted to see again. Clark glared at the side of his head. "What are you doing here?" Bruce grinned at him innocently. "Oh, my meeting just ended, so I figured I'd come visit you. I mean, now that everyone knows we're married, I think it's about time I met all your teammates. Don't you?" "Well, not all of them," Wally interjected. "Batman's not here." Batman. Bruce scoffed. I live in Gotham. We've met. This curt response was clearly not the reaction some people were expecting. Both Clark and Bruce knew that their fondness for Batman only extended so far, but Clark guessed that they hadn't heard a civilian be so dismissive of a superhero before. In the interest of keeping the reason for that dismissal a secret, he said, I'd appreciate if you kept your personal opinion of my teammate outside of my workplace. Brucie just waved his hand flippantly, apparently not even deeming that worthy of an answer. I've actually come to take you home. Today's been so long, and I don't want to go home without you, he complained, letting a bit of a whine into his tone. If Bruce would have ever considered revealing his identity, Clark was sure that the memory of this event would stop him. There was absolutely no way he'd let them know that Batman and Brucie Wayne were in any way related after this little performance. I can't just leave. I'm doing things. Bruce gave him a look. Really? As far as I could tell, you were sitting here bored out of your mind. At least at home, you can put that big, strong body to good use and do something more worthwhile. He wiggled his eyebrows and let him know exactly which activity he meant. Nope. Clark stood up abruptly. He didn't let Bruce fall on his ass, though, and he was quite proud of himself for resisting the urge. He stood them both on their feet and grabbed his husband's shoulders, pushing him over to the door. He could feel his face burning. Nope, no, absolutely not. I will see you at home later, after I speak to Batman about your visit today. He gave him a firm shove to start walking back down the hallway, and glared at his retreating form, ignoring the laughter coming from it. Then he turned back to his team, face probably still red with mortification. I'm so sorry about him. He's an asshole. The laughter behind him was redoubled, and Clark brought his hands up to drag over his face. Wally cackled. I like him a lot. Clark groaned. The moment Batman stepped into the room, 10 minutes later, Clark shot up from his seat. He stalked over to him, grabbed his shoulder, and spun him back around, cutting off the little tantrum that Clark had predicted earlier before it could start. It would have been so welcome just 15 minutes ago, before Bruce came in and did all of that. I need to talk to you, he said, pushing him out of the room and down the corridor. As they walked away, Bruce had the audacity to say, I got an alert about an unauthorized visitor to the Watchtower. Know anything about that? Clark glared at him, scowling at the back of his head so hard that there was no way he couldn't feel it. I hate you so much, he muttered. They walked to Clark's room and stepped inside. Batman pulled his cowl off, revealing Bruce's stupid face grinning up at him. Not 1 ounce of regret. Fantastic. What the hell are you doing? Clark hissed. What? I'm not doing anything. Yeah, the fake innocent act was not working one bit. Right. So you're not going to explain why Brucie Wayne just waltzed in and embarrassed me in front of the people who should respect me. Oh, come on. I barely embarrassed you. You sat on my lap and propositioned me. Bruce scoffed, dropping down on the edge of the bed. Propositioned. You couldn't have told me you were going to do this? Clark continued, ignoring the interjection. Bruce, if I was going to introduce Bruce Wayne to the League, I would have introduced them to the actual you, not the guy who has a reputation for sleeping around and passing out in the middle of charity events. That happened 1 time, and it was because Ivy... I don't care! Clark knew his volume was rising, so he took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. I need to know if you're planning on bringing Brucie around again, and I need you to tell me when. You don't want me to stop completely. Clark opened his eyes, again, and saw his husband cock his head to the side and raise his eyebrows. As long as I know when, I'll be able to brace myself for any of your... He waved his hands in the air. Shenanigans. Bruce snorted in amusement. Got it. Anything else? Well, I guess I would appreciate if Brucie stopped coming around and was replaced by Bruce, but I don't think that's gonna happen. So, I guess, just don't embarrass me too much. Clark, you're embarrassed by everything. I am not. Uh-huh. Bruce shot him a very unimpressed look, and Clark met it with a glare. Well, then just be slightly more you, then. I'd like them to at least get some sense of why I married you, and that's not gonna happen if all they see is that guy." Bruce rolled his eyes and huffed. "Fine. You have to admit their reactions were pretty funny, though." He didn't have to admit anything, thank you very much. And yet, I'm pretty sure Hal pissed himself when you came in. Clark realized then that he would do anything for the grin that stretched across Bruce's face, and if anything, included introducing his husband's incredibly obnoxious public persona, who famously couldn't take anything seriously, to a group of superheroes that saved the world on a regular basis. He was screwed. Chapter 2. To Bruce's credit, he lasted about a month before the urge to shenanigan again grew too strong. It also helped that the first 2 or 3 weeks were busy, both in and out of the suit. Once their days became calmer, though, he started growing restless, and a restless Bruce was never a good thing. Clark had been caught up at work, finishing a piece that Perry had assigned him last minute. He was exhausted, annoyed, and about ready to cry, as the formatting on his document got messed up yet again. He texted Bruce 2 hours ago to complain and apologize for the fact that he would miss their date. It wasn't a huge inconvenience. There were no reservations to cancel or anything, but he'd bugged Bruce to watch a movie with him after dinner, before leaving on patrol, and he'd reluctantly agreed. If anything, B was probably glad that he'd called it off. His phone screen lit up from where it was lying on his desk, and he leaned over to read the text. At WT. Come over when you're done? He frowned a bit in confusion. Why was B at the Watchtower? He was supposed to be on patrol, and there were enough people at the Watchtower today that they didn't need an extra set of eyes. Much less 2, if he was asking Superman to join them. Nothing was wrong, or he would have been alerted. Clark shook his head, bringing his attention back to his work. He'd finish up in an hour or so. He could go up and see what was going on afterwards. No point wasting brain power on this, when all of his energy was focused on finding out why exactly Word hated him so damn much. 50 minutes later, after Clark had shot an email over to Perry to let him know that the article was done, he stepped into the Watchtower. There didn't seem to be an emergency going on, but Clark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As he walked through the halls, passing empty room after empty room, that feeling only intensified. He could hear laughing and yelling coming from somewhere, and followed the noise over to the monitor room. He stopped short right in the doorway, unable to comprehend what the hell he was seeing. Why were there so many people? It looked like everyone in the league was here for some strange reason. This room was generally considered to be the most boring room, and people usually dreaded coming here for yet another boring shift. So why was everyone here? And actually, a much better question, why the hell were they all covered in pink frosting? Clark pinched the bridge of his nose. The room had quieted down considerably, and he looked up to see everyone staring at him warily. This was their reaction to Superman walking in on whatever this was. Clark would have given anything to see the reaction if it was Batman instead. Unfortunately for him, Batman was currently indisposed. If currently indisposed meant standing in the middle of the room, hands and face covered in frosting and crumbs, and grinning like an idiot. As if this wasn't enough, he seemed to have been the instigator of this chaos. If the box of pink frosted cupcakes behind him were any indication. Boxes he'd had Clark bring home from the bakery a few streets down from the planet yesterday for a work celebration. Liar. Clarky! Bruce walked over to him, and Clark dodged away from his disgusting hands. What's happening, Bruce? What is this? Turning around and walking away from the madness seemed like a pretty good idea at this point. He'd go back home, eat some food that wasn't pink frosted cupcakes, watch that movie they'd missed, and snuggle up into bed and wait for his calm, collected, clean husband. Remember those cupcakes I asked you to get? He asked, licking frosting off his thumb. It was yesterday, Bruce. Yes, I remember. Well, Carla, you remember Carla. Turns out Carla brought the exact same ones to the celebration. And there was enough food there anyways that I thought I might as well bring these ones back home. And then I thought, Clark, he loves these cupcakes. I should bring them to him. But then I got up here and you weren't anywhere, so I figured I'd just share them with everyone anyways. No sense in letting them go to waste, yeah? Yep, definitely lying. For one, Clark had never even seen these cupcakes before yesterday, and certainly didn't love them. Also, that retelling made absolutely no sense whatsoever time-wise. Superman wasn't even scheduled to be up in the Watchtower tonight, and Bruce was fully aware of that. But he just shook his head, tiredly, unwilling to expend any more energy on understanding this situation. Brucie's playful demeanor dropped somewhat, as he seemed to take in the slight slump of Clark's shoulders and the dazed look in his eyes. He spun back around to the League, grin back in place once more. You guys can entertain yourselves for a while, right? I promise not to take too long. Clark couldn't see his face, but knowing him, he probably threw in a wink at the end for good measure. Then he turned to Clark and ushered him out with his sticky hands. They walked to the closest washroom in silence, shoulders brushing together with every step. Bruce washed his hands and his face, and dried them as Clark leaned against the wall. Then he stepped up close and reached up and pulled him into a gentle kiss. I didn't mean for it to get this out of hand, Bruce said, after he'd pulled away. Clark didn't let him get too far, though, resting their foreheads together. I know you said to tell you when Brucie came by, but I really did just mean to give everyone cupcakes, hang around a bit, and leave. Turns out, when you add Brucie and Ollie chaos into Barry and Hal's shit show, things get a bit out of control, he added, sounding vaguely disgusted with himself for getting along with Hal Jordan. Clark huffed out a laugh, and Bruce hit his shoulder gently. He leaned back to look at him in the eye, and asked, "Want to go home? I can excuse us. I think I've socialized enough, anyways." Clark took a breath, assessing his level of tiredness. On the one hand, this little break, short as it was, had re-energized him enough that he was willing to go back out and join the chaos, even if that was just talking to Diana on the side while watching his husband make a fool of himself. On the other, better, hand, he's been ready to collapse into bed for hours, and dragging Bruce home to act as his personal body pillow sounded incredibly appealing. Yeah, let's go home. On their way back to tell everyone they were leaving, Clark suddenly remembered something that had confused him. Why was everyone in the monitor room? Wanted to keep an eye on everything, because I knew no one else would, Bruce grumbled. And you let a food fight break out? Doesn't seem like you. Oh, trust me. It was annoying me the whole time. Batman's gonna be pissed about it tomorrow. How the hell did you land Bruce Wayne? Hal hissed at Clark, sliding into the chair next to him. A fair question, and one he's been asking himself for a decade. He still hasn't come up with an answer. You know what, Hal? I don't even know, he responded truthfully. Hal grumbled, clearly unsatisfied with that answer. But... he cut himself off. Well, how'd you meet? Work. Oh my god. He groaned loudly in frustration, folding his arms on the table and burying his face in them. Clark tried not to grin. He was beginning to understand why Bruce found so much amusement in being purposefully obtuse. Hal raised his head to glare at him. Well, did you interview him as a reporter? Did you go to one of his parties? Did you meet him as Superman? Did he know you were Superman and... He paused, seeming to rack his brain for a name. Clark Kent. Clark supplied helpfully. Right, that one. Did he know you were Superman and Clark Kent before you started dating, or after? You wouldn't have gone to Gotham as Superman because Batman would have had your head. So did you meet there in civvies, or did he go to Metropolis? Bruce Wayne said he knew Batman, right? Do they know each other because of you, or because they both live in Gotham? Hal gasped suddenly, and choked on air, and Clark had to thump him on the back. Once he'd regained the use of his lungs, Hal turned to him with wide eyes. Does Batman approve? Clark couldn't help the snort that got pulled out of him. Why would I need Batman's approval to marry someone? Sure, when that someone was Batman himself, approval was a very important thing. But Hal didn't know that. Because he's your best friend. Bruce is my best friend. Yeah, okay, sure. Clark didn't appreciate the eye roll that came with that, but he decided to let it slide. Come on, Batman's your work husband. You can't deny that. You might be actually married to someone else, but you two communicate like you've known each other your whole lives. There's no way you'd let a relationship get as far as this without Batman's approval. But Batman definitely doesn't seem like he'd like a guy like Bruce Wayne, and Bruce Wayne didn't seem like he liked Batman either, so something else must be going on here. You can just call him Bruce, Clark interjected. So, if you married Bruce Wayne, Hal continued, way too caught up in his theorizing to pay any attention to him. It has to be because it was a mutually beneficial relationship between him and Batman. Like, crime rates. But I don't know why Bruce Wayne would have control over that. Or something to do with Wayne Enterprises, or... Oh! Maybe it was because he funded the Watchtower. Because Spooky wouldn't have passed up that chance to get funding from a guy who has billions to throw around. Especially not if that guy had skin in the game, and wouldn't give up anyone's identity, and therefore wouldn't be a security risk. And that skin in the game, in this case, is you. Say what you will about Hal Jordan, but when he senses an opportunity to be a nosy little shit, he'll grab onto it, and follow it to the end of the line. They both sat there, stunned for a few long moments. Clark was kind of impressed that the word vomit had turned into a pretty solid theory about why Batman tolerated Bruce Wayne. Hal was staring, wide-eyed into the distance, apparently having overwhelmed his brain enough that he had to let it cool down. Clark cleared his throat. Right. So, was there anything else? Hal turned to him slowly, still with that vacant stare. Clark was beginning to get concerned. Then he snapped out of it and said, So, how do you meet again? Clark sighed. Brucie. Bruce turned around from where he was standing in Clark's personal space. They'd been pressed together a few minutes ago by a crowd of reporters, pushing and shoving to get a good shot for their newspapers. They'd stayed close together even after the crowd had moved on, Clark keeping B close by, poking his finger into one of his belt loops. Bruce grinned at the couple approaching them. Ollie! Dinah! He pulled away just enough to pull Ollie into a hug and kiss Dinah on the cheek. Then he stepped up close again and looped an arm around Clark's waist. Clark unhooked his finger and slowly slid a palm up B's back to rest on his shoulder, relishing in the slight shiver it elicited. Oliver, Dinah. He greeted with a smile and a nod. Dinah smiled up at him easily, but Ollie hesitated for a second, staring at Clark with his jaw slack. This was the first time they'd met as civilians since Clark revealed his identity. He could see the cogs turning in Ollie's head as the images of Clark Kent and Superman overlapped. He shook his head, after a beat, snapping out of his thoughts to smile and nod back. Then he glanced at Bruce, nervously, probably hoping he didn't notice the lapse in attention. Bruce had graciously looked away, but Clark could see the tiny smirk he had in the corner of his mouth. How have you been, Bruce? Bruce turned back to him, scrunching his face up in thought. Aw, you know, same old. You and Dinah? Yeah, much the same. And, how have you been, Clark? And good gosh, if Ollie was going to be this awkward around him in public, then he'd probably make sure he never approached him when anyone but Bruce was around to hear. Even now, Clark was looking around at the crowd around them, trying to see if anyone was watching them and witnessing the absolute travesty that was Oliver Queen trying to be normal. I'm doing well, he said, after he'd determined that no one was looking at them weirdly. Not as well as Bruce, though. He's been looking forward to this event for weeks. He's delighted to be here. He grinned. Bruce had not, in fact, been looking forward to this event, and he pinched Clark's side hard in an effort to get him to stop talking. Luckily for Clark, and unluckily for Bruce, he barely felt it. He kept going on about how much he wanted to leave the house to spend his entire evening here. I had no idea he was such a big fan of overly elaborate baby showers disguised as grand openings for fancy nurseries for overprivileged children. Bruce, whose smile had changed from the easy Brucie smile to a more strained version that barely hid his annoyance, said, Yeah, that's great, babe. I don't think we need to tell Ollie and Dinah how much I've been looking forward to this. And now, Clark could let this go. He could leave this bit and retain some chance that Bruce would actually talk to him tonight after they got home. But also, it's alright, hun. I don't think they mind. You guys don't mind, do you? It was clear from Dinah's small grin and Oliver's over-exaggerated facade of innocence that neither of them believed any word that was coming out of Clark's mouth about how excited Bruce was. They weren't that accustomed to seeing annoyance on Brucie, but they gladly took the cue from Clark that it was fine to continue the bit going. Not at all! Dinah was quick to assure him. Row, he loved her. We're all too happy to hear about it. What part do you like most? The giant cake that's not even made of cake? The screaming children? The plastic wine glasses? Oh, Bruce has been gushing about all of it! Clark beamed. Bruce exhaled through his nose and seemed to resign himself to an evening of teasing. Clark had just finished waiting around for the police to finally arrive on the scene of an attempted burglary. Honestly, 2 hours? Gotham had better response times than that. When he got a text from Bruce. BW at WT. He'd never tell Bruce, but he found it endlessly amusing when he referred to himself as BW in texts. It rarely happened, since it was only when he had to distinguish between Bruce Wayne and Batman in a way that wasn't readily apparent from context clues. But Clark got a kick out of it every time it did happen. He should probably head up there just to make sure Brucie wasn't causing any trouble. He looked from his phone to the police cruisers to the ice cream shop across the street. He contemplated going over and grabbing a scoop or two. After all, he had a sworn duty to keep an eye on the situation until it was resolved. And he really wanted ice cream. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced down. Don't freak out. Clark launched into the air, barreling towards the Watchtower at top speed. Wally was the first person he bumped into as he marched through the halls. He looked nervous and skittish, and like this was the last place he wanted to be. Wally, Clark said, trying desperately to force calm into his voice. What happened? Bruce said not to freak out. Wally blurted out. I know what Bruce said. Where the hell is he? Wally shrunk back. Medbay? He squeaked. Fuck. Clark stormed away, squeezing his hands into fists as hard as he could. The Watchtower Medbay was a flurry of activity. The small part of Clark's brain that wasn't consumed with worry for his husband's well-being wondered just how many people had gotten hurt. Then he stepped into the room and saw the single patient sitting on the edge of a cot, happily chatting away with his faithful attendees. Clark's next thought was, shit, how bad is he hurt for there to be so many people here? But no. A quick x-ray showed nothing major, only a lump on his head that already had an ice pack held to it, which meant that they were all here for Bruce Wayne, which meant the inevitable shouting match was much more awkward. Hey, honey. Don't you hey, honey me. What the hell happened? Nothing. Do not try this with me right now, Bruce Thomas Wayne. Clark saw everyone's eyes widen in his periphery, and they all slunk out of the room. He knew they wouldn't go far, though. Not when there was drama to listen in on. And he was proven right when they tried not to make it too obvious that they had stopped just outside the door. I'm not trying anything. It wasn't even serious. You're sitting in the Watchtower Medbay right now with a head injury. You might be able to use that when I can take you home without worrying about anything. But currently, from where I'm standing, you do not have that luxury. Now, why don't you cut the bullcrap and tell me exactly what the hell happened? It was just... I was, Bruce. Clark gritted out. It was barely a hostage situation. What? Clark was well aware of the fact that probably everyone currently on the Watchtower was looking through the open door behind him. But frankly, at this point, he couldn't care less. It was nothing. Bruce Wayne, I swear to Row, if you say that one more time, I will punt you into the sun. Bruce let out an annoyed sigh through his nose. You still haven't answered my question. What happened? I was in Gotham at a bank. He began slowly, patiently, as though he was talking to a child. Clark would have yelled at him for being patronizing, But he was finally going on with the story, and Clark didn't want to start this all over again. Some people came with guns and held it up. I put up a fight, and some asshole pistol whipped me. And I sat there for 5 minutes until the league came. It was not... He cut himself off. Yes? It was what? You want to finish that sentence? Well, I don't exactly want to get punched into the sun. Now do I? Bruce said, with a saccharine smile. Clark clenched his jaw and turned away from him slightly. Then he turned back, less agitated than before, but equally annoyed. It was serious enough that the League got involved, but you couldn't yell out one Superman into the air? You were on patrol. It wasn't important. I've been sitting outside a house for the past 2 hours making small talk with a 13-year-old boy. Why don't you let me decide what's important or not? Okay, Bruce cut himself off again. 2 hours? Gotham has better response time than that. That's what I said. Clark snapped his mouth shut and let out an aggravated groan. Stop trying to distract me. I wasn't. Why didn't you call for me? Clark, it was 5 minutes. Yeah, takes less than 5 seconds to say Superman. Fine, next time I'm in a bank and it gets robbed, I'll scream into the air and hope you're only talking to a 13-year-old kid about his Pokemon card collection. Clark paused. I know you're making fun of me, but it was actually a stamp collection. What kind of kid has a stamp collection nowadays? Exactly, which is why I talked to him for 2 hours. He was actually very interested. See? So it was good that I didn't call for you. Imagine how sad and deprived you would be if I had pulled you away from that engaging conversation. Yeah, imagine how much more sad and depraved I would be without a husband. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up from its neat Superman style. Bruce went quiet. Then he stood up and walked towards Clark, pulling him into a hug. I'm okay, he murmured into his neck. I know you're okay, Clark clenched his jaw, not letting any more noises through. He buried his face in Bruce's hair and tried to calm his breathing. What is it? Clark shook his head, screwing his jaw even tighter. Bruce lifted his head from his shoulder, looking up at the doorway. Would you guys mind giving us a moment? There was some shuffling and retreating footsteps, then the door closed and they were left alone. Clark, what is it? It's nothing. Hey, if I'm not allowed to say that, then you aren't either. You already know my thoughts on you getting hurt without telling me. Honestly, Clark, it was just a bump on the head. Yeah, and what about next time? And the time after that? I know you can handle yourself in the suit, but what about out of it? What if they'd shot you? What if the League had taken longer? Did you even call for backup, or were you just waiting? Did you... Clark. Bruce pulled back and took Clark's face between his hands, forcing him to make eye contact. Do you trust me? Yes, but... No buts. Yes or no. Do you trust me? Yes. Then you can trust me to assess a situation accurately, make a proper judgment based on the potential threats to my well-being. To your well-being? Clark scoffed. Have you met yourself? Babe, I'm serious. Clark took a breath and squeezed his eyes shut. As much as he complained about Bruce not caring about his well-being, he knew that wasn't true. Not entirely. He'd always put others before himself, sure, but he could never poke the bear when he knew no one was in danger. And if he didn't call for help, then he knew everyone would be safe. Everyone, including him. He had a family to come home to, too. Clark sighed softly, eyes still closed. I trust you. This was far from the first time they'd had this argument, and it would be far from the last time. But for now, Clark just rested his forehead against his husband's and whispered, Can we go home now? Notes. I like to think that hell is the worst word Clark can say out loud when he's angry. The angrier he is, the more hells there will be. The kids have a tally going on how many times he said it during an argument with Bruce. The record is currently 18, and Tim is delighted to have been present for it. This has been part 1 of How to Introduce Your Husband to Your Super Serious Crime-Fighting Group. If you want to read ahead, you can go down to the description below and follow the link to the author's original work. While you're there, you can leave them many comments and kudos. If you enjoyed my reading, you can subscribe to catch the next part, or go down to the comments and tell me what else I should read. Thank you for listening. Kid about his Pokemon card collection.